Hey my good friend, Sam Haymark for Test Driven TV. In the latest face-off video where I take two test drives and I put them together side by side or face to face so you can see how they compare, we're looking at the Audi A4 Quattro and the Lexus IS 200T. Under the hood of our tester is the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. This is the third generation of this engine, now making 252 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. Pretty healthy for a 2-liter engine. Now this one, here it's made it to a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic, but it's also available with a 6-speed manual. But here in this car, as it's equipped, it's rated at 24 mpg city, 31 mpg highway, and 27 mpg combined. So I always start out with the big question, how does it go? Woo! Ha-ha! Now that is nice. Woo! Ooh, speeding. All right, so 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo doesn't sound like much, but this thing's got some punch. Even 252 horsepower doesn't sound like much. It's about the torque. 273 pound-feet of torque, and you can feel every bit of it. Now I've got this in dynamic mode. This has multiple drive modes here with the Audi Drive Select, and with the 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, power comes on immediately, and of course you got the paddle shifters here which work very well, but I'm just not a paddle shifter guy, so I tend to let the transmission just do its job, because more often than not I am disappointed in the paddle shifters because they usually just don't always do it. But this is an engine that you could really romp on it, you can stomp on it, and the best part about it is it never feels less than its price. This car is approaching $53,000, and with a 4-cylinder it doesn't feel like a disappointment. It's not a buzzy engine, it's actually quite refined, and it's very fitting of a car in this price range. Woo! It's just got a nice sound too. Yes. And you can definitely get a ticket with this thing. Anyway, I digress. So this is rated at 27 mpg combined, and before I came up here filming today, in my week with it, I actually achieved 30 mpg. And believe it or not, that was actually weighted more towards city driving. So, 2-liter engine, turbo, in a place where there used to be a V6. The question becomes, does it have power? Yes. Yes, it does. Woo! Not bad at all for a 4-cylinder turbo. I am definitely breaking the law now. And it does have power, 241 horsepower to be exact, in addition to its 258 pound-feet of torque. That's a significant amount more than the old base 2.5-liter V6, which only had 200 horsepower and a meager 185 pound-feet of twist. Sadly, it doesn't come with a manual transmission, but the new 2-liter 4-cylinder betters the old V6's 6-speed automatic with the new 8-speed Sport Shift Auto, very much like the one found in the IS 350. And the transmission really is your friend, especially in sport mode where it really pays attention a little bit more. Just works so nicely. The nice thing about this motor when it's really cooking is you almost really can't tell it's a 4-cylinder. It's quiet, it's refined, it doesn't make a racket, and it certainly isn't rough or what you might even call noisy. It would be so great if the Scion FRS had this engine. I wouldn't bitch about that car anymore. This is a motor that really definitely most certainly belongs here in a higher end sports sedan. And so my takeaway here is that you're not going to be disappointed because you decided to go for the base entry-level motor. This is a motor that's just as satisfying in its overall refinement and its willingness to please you as the V6 is. It just doesn't have quite as much horsepower. That's the only thing. That's it. That's the only thing you're missing. And
And when it comes to fuel economy, it performs nicely as well. The EPA rates it at 22 mpg city, 33 mpg highway with a 26 mpg combined rating. In my time with it, I achieved 28 mpg combined, well over what was promised. And it's even a bit more than we got with the old IS 250 V6.
Now this is really what I've come out here for. This is my favorite windy mountain road, Highway 88, Apache Trail, just east of Phoenix, Arizona. And the great thing about this road is, at least in the right times of day in the year, it's very lightly traveled. And the surface up here really gives me a good read on how well put together this car is, because the suspension really gets tested with some rougher pavement up here. And there's also some smooth pavement, but a lot of tight curves. A lot of opportunities to see really how a sports sedan can handle. So what I'm finding out here is this car just feels like it was designed specifically for this road. It's very light on its feet. The steering, it's very light. Now I've got this set in dynamic just like I did when I was accelerating and really sort of feeling out the power. And what I like about it is it's still pretty light in the steering feel. They haven't made it overly heavy to make it feel high performance. But over these rough pavement patches, the suspension doesn't get too rough and harsh, yet it still feels sharp. They haven't softened it to the point to give you a good ride at the expense of sharpness, especially when you get into some of these sharper curves here. And so I've got a really nice 5-link suspension up front, 5-link suspension in the back, and it just really shows up in how this car feels. Brakes, you can get right on them coming into these tight curves. Whew, you can hear all my equipment rolling around back there in the trunk. And so again, I go over some of these rougher patches here and the car just really soaks it up in a nice refined way. The chassis feels very tight as far as the structure is concerned. So much so I get just a little bit of rattle and squeak in the interior trims here and there. But this is just a joy. This car just really feels sharp as it can be up here. Very precise in its steering. And the tires really just feel like they're really tuned well with this chassis. It's a nice medley, I'd say. And it really is tough in this class to have the best of both worlds. A nice, tight, sharp chassis that'll throw your stuff around, that's responsive, that feels precise, yet still has a nice ride. And it's quiet too at speed. Therefore, chassis, whew. My biggest question when I first started to drive this car out here on my favorite windy mountain road is, does it have better handling because it doesn't have that heavy V6? And that really isn't even fair, because the V6 that's in the IS 350 really isn't that heavy. But this is a lighter engine, therefore this does have a little bit of a lighter and more flingable feel. A little bit more balance. It still has a bit of a push in the front, but it definitely feels a little bit less heavy, especially in the steering. So when you lay into a corner, it just feels a little bit more like it's doing what you ask and not trying to push quite as hard. Now, one thing I will point out is on this F Sport, it doesn't have the adjustable suspension that a lot of the Lexus F Sports have. This being the entry-level model, they didn't quite dial it up that far. So the suspension on this comes one way all the time. When you do put it up in sport mode, that does change the feel of the steering, but that's the only handling aspect that you get out of dialing up that drive mode on this car. The suspension does have a little bit of skitteriness over some of the more rougher places, but for the most part, this thing keeps its composure. And the most important thing is that the skitteriness doesn't come through the steering wheel. That's really sort of the point where I go, this car is a pile. It's not doing that. The skitteriness is just kind of there over those rough patches.
The skitteriness is less a character flaw of this car as it is the simple result of a moderately firm sport suspension paired with its 35 series front and 40 series rear low-profile tires.
Now I know some of you might be saying, why did you compare an all-wheel drive Quattro to a rear-wheel drive sedan? Well, the reality is I test what I get. They give me these cars, and when I can do a matchup like this, I do. And I do think these cars are very closely matched. They're very competitive in the marketplace, they're priced very similarly, and the thing is with the Audi, it does have the all-wheel drive, but that does make it a little bit more of a rear-wheel drive feeling type of car. And you can also get all-wheel drive in the IS, just not the 200T. That said, if these cars really have a big difference, it's power. Even though they're pretty closely matched in 0 to 60 times, if you look at the published reports, they're within a tenth of a second, 5.6, 5.7 seconds. The Audi just has a torquier feel to it. When you really lay into the throttle, you get a little bit more of a push into the back, and you don't have to rev that engine nearly as much as you do with the Lexus. But that said, as you can tell, I really enjoy driving both of these cars. I like them very much. So I want to know what you think. Comment down below, and you can see test drives for both of these cars by clicking right there, the full detailed thing. Thanks for watching.